Well, this wraps up our Keep Your Eyes to the Skies week here on the show. We've had a fascinating week with many different looks and aspects of ufology. And tonight, joining me, I'm very excited about this. I had a chance as I was flipping through one of the myriad of channels that I watch, and Amazon, Hulu, and I'm always looking for interesting documentaries, and one jumped to my attention. My Mom Talks to Aliens from 2010. And this charming documentary, very fascinating, told a story that I was so intrigued by. And I knew that once I saw this and saw the genuine nature of the mum featured in this documentary, we'd need to have her on the show. And she is here with us this evening to share some of her insights and research and work. She's known as the Alien Lady, Mary Rodwell. She's recognized internationally as one of Australia's leading researchers and writers in the UFO and contact phenomena areas. Mary is the author of the highly acclaimed book, Awakening, How Extraterrestrial Contact Can Transform Your Life, and producer of the EBE award-winning documentary series, Expressions of ET Contact, A Visual Blueprint, and Expressions of ET Contact, A Communication and Healing Blueprint. Her new book, The New Human, which describes and documents star children, has come out, and we are here to talk to her about her life, her research, and findings. Mary, thank you so much for spending this time with us this evening.
It's a pleasure, Dave.
That was one of the most interesting documentaries I've had a chance to see. It was compelling in so many ways. And for people that have not had a chance to see this, your son, who obviously adores you and loves you, doesn't necessarily subscribe to your theories and thoughts on what's going on in the great big world around us. And he kind of spends this documentary following you to watch how you do what you do, your lectures, confronting skeptics, and hearing these stories firsthand for himself. And it was a transformative documentary. I thought it was really, really one of the best of the UFO documentaries I've had a chance to see regarding a researcher. And was that hard to do? I mean, knowing that kind of the objective was almost at the beginning, it felt like your son was just trying to prove to you once and for all this was nonsense.
Absolutely. I mean, he's very much the scientist. And the whole idea of the documentary primarily was to show that in families when you've got different perspectives, and I get that a lot in my work, where either a husband or a wife or a sibling has experiences and the rest of the family struggle with it or can't believe it or find it too outrageous. So it really echoed very much in my research the same kind of scenario where you're trying to explain why you believe in something or why a thing is real to you. And you've got family members that can't go there for one reason or another, maybe because it challenges their belief system. It may be that they are too scared. There can be a lot of different reasons. So primarily it was about that. But on top of that, of course, is that theme of a reality that a lot of the public still don't know is real, that this is happening, it's real, it's happening to millions, perhaps even billions of people. And, you know, the public is still very uninformed. And so it covered two bases. And it was a very interesting thing with my son because he loves, as you say, he loves me to bits, but he still struggles even now with the fact that his mom is involved in this way with something that I don't think certainly he doesn't completely dismiss it, but he still doesn't feel convinced for himself yet. And I think that's fine.
Well, first of all, you're going to be attending the conference in Australia at Alex Kayas's conference this year, correct? Australia Paracon?
No, not this year. I did a couple of years ago. I mean, I have done the Paracon, but this time I'm actually coming to the US in about a month's time, and I'm doing 5 different venues. So that's going to be pretty full on. The whole thing is with this, Dave, is that, you know, it's a bigger picture here rather than, you know, just looking at UFOs and
right.
ETs, because many people who open up to this find themselves seeing spirits, ghosts, if you like, seeing energy fields, seeing a whole range of paranormal, and they have a range of paranormal experiences. So it's not just about, you know, the UFOs and the ETs. It's all in a similar kind of frequency or dimension, so that if they're seeing ETs, they may very well be seeing ghost spirits, energy fields, and have paranormal experiences as well.
I was hoping to meet you when we were going to be out there in Australia this year. Where are you going to be visiting in the United States so we can make sure our listeners know how to see you and meet you and hear your presentations?
I'm firstly going to Sedona. There's a wonderful expo there, Awareness of Life Expo, which is in Cottonwood on the 13th to the 15th in Sedona. Then I'm speaking at the Arlington Institute in West Virginia on the 21st of October. Then I fly to Miami and speaking to groups there in Miami for a week. Then I have another week in Boston where I'm speaking to similar groups and researchers. And finally, another expo, Awaken a Powered Expo in Detroit, which is from the 10th to the 12th of November. So it's a very big trip.
We will put up a link to Mary's website so that you can find those locations and get a chance to go out and visit and spend some time with her to hear her story. Let's start, if you don't mind, Mary, for those that have not had the opportunity to read your books or see the documentary, and give us a little background. What brought your fascination to the field of UFO studies and alien interaction?
Oh, the journey's been a lifelong one in the sense that I've always been interested in the weird and the wonderful. But as a counselor, I came across a lot of people that had unusual experiences. When you're dealing with grief and bereavement, people often have strange things where they feel someone that's passed on as, in some way interacted with them or is still around, or they feel them around or whatever. So that highlighted to me that we do, I think we exist after our physical death as a consciousness. And from that, my interest was in past lives. As a hypnotherapist, I've taken people into past lives and in between lives where they talk about coming back and incarnating in a human life, for example. But it was a gentleman walking through the door that said to me, I've heard you're open-minded. For this, there's no support groups. For this, people just think you're crazy, and proceeded to tell me about his ET experiences, going up on spacecraft, waking up with marks on his body. The whole family were involved, and this wasn't just him. And that in itself gives it enormous credibility when you know it's not just one individual. He was very articulate. He was able to tell me more and more about his experiences through his life. And that started me on the road, really, because I wanted to understand. And I think, life has...
Mary, you were open to the idea of the fascinating and the possibilities. But when somebody comes to you and actually sits down in front of you for therapy and starts to open up about this, as a therapist, how do you separate your wonder and fascination and awe from, I also have to remember, I'm a therapist and I have to make sure that this person is not crazy, this person is not delusional or possibly dangerous?
Very good question. And when you've had a background, as I was a nurse midwife for a number of years, and then I went into and trained as a counselor. You soon get with someone who's come to you a feeling and a sense from the way they speak, how articulate they are, how rational they appear, how logical they appear to be, and they can tell you some incredible things. They'll know it's incredible. They'll know that it's hard for you to take on board. And it's a combination of all of that that gives you a sense if someone's literally needing help, other kind of help, if you like, in terms of some kind of psychiatric aberration, or that they just experienced something absolutely extraordinary and they're trying to make sense of it. And you can get a very clear sense of that when you're with someone. And this has, been my guidance all along, because for me, there's an authenticity when someone's speaking their truth. And that was what I saw with this gentleman called Ellis Taylor. And I actually took his case to a supervision. I was doing advanced counselling at the Worsley Institute in Perth, and I took it as a case study because I wanted to hear what my colleagues thought of this. And interestingly, every one of them started to tell me about strange experiences they'd had, and not one of them suggested that this man was hallucinating and that it was a fantasy.
Interesting. Now, was that a surprise to you?
It was an amazing surprise. What it was telling me was that, quite honestly, Dave, that we all seem to have experiences we can't explain in third dimensional terms. And it reinforced that to me. And then, of course, I started on my journey of realizing and researching that there are not just thousands, I believe millions of people around the globe. I've worked with over 3,000 now globally that have had experiences, families, parents, grandparents, and children, young children under the age of 10 that have talked about going on spacecraft, what they learn on spacecraft, how connected they are to some of the beings. And these are children as young as 4 or 5 years old that are talking about this.
How do you, I guess, differentiate between someone who is delusional and someone that is having these real life experiences? Because there are some people that are very delusional and will claim to have seen things, and to them, it is just as real as a person who is really having an encounter with aliens.
Again, a good question. There are certain patterns of experience that you can't know about unless you're an experiencer. And that is why we have these questionnaires which give us a bit of a sense of whether or not this is relevant to the person. I mean, that's one of the things. And when you question them and when you talk to them, as I say, there are certain things most of the public don't know about that I can ask and will give me a clear sense of whether this person is really having these experiences or not. But the other fascinating part of this is that through these experiences, people change in incredible ways in terms of their focus in life, what's important to them. They make major changes in terms of how they live, even diet, the way that they look at life. It becomes a very transformative experience, and you don't transform and change your life with a fantasy or a hallucination.
All right, and there's good timing for that comment. Do you have birds in the background there?
Yes,
okay.
You can hear them.
Yes, but I just want to clear that up so that I don't get inundated with emails of people saying, oh my God, while she was talking, I could hear aliens talking in the background. And I will get those emails, so I like to address when we can hear some artifact in the background. And it did sound weird. As you're talking, you're hearing this in the background.
Those are kookaburras and parrots. I get a lot of them because I'm living in central Queensland, which is subtropical.
Beautiful. It is a gorgeous area. I can't wait to get back out to Australia. So you've had this opportunity to speak to all of these people regarding alien encounters, UFO sightings, and other kind of what we call spiritual or supernatural aspects of our world. Has this opened you up, Mary, since you've begun researching this more diligently and becoming open to it to have your own experiences?
Very good question, Dave. I bet I could ask you the same question, and I bet you would be saying something similar to me. You can't listen to thousands of stories from all sorts of people. And I'm talking about, when we talk about credible, it's not, not just the housewives and the children, but, I've talked to pilots and policemen and clinical psychologists that have had experiences, for example, and this kind of thing. You can't help but start to open up to this reality and not only research it, but start to shift your own way of perceiving things and understanding things. We're all, I think, able to tap into that multidimensional side. I've had no conscious experiences with UFOs other than I have seen some strange lights in the sky. I've had no missing time or anything like that. But I am aware that I can tap into things, and I have a sensing and a knowing, which I call that multidimensional side of yourself that taps into the hologram, if you like, that intuition, all those kinds of things and synchronicities. And certainly some strange things have happened. I was talking to a gentleman in New Zealand once, and he had finally realized that he was having experiences, and we talked, believe it or not, for almost 7 hours. And the next day he phoned me and he said, Mary, I have to tell you this. I promise you I'm not going to talk to you for another 7 hours. But I rang up the telephone company and I told them that I'd had a long conversation in Australia, and could they give me the cost of the phone call because I wanted to know what I had to save up for. And he said they told me they had no record of the call. And that was 7 hours we had spoken. So really weird stuff does happen. And that's just one example.
Wow, that is pretty impressive. E.T. was definitely helping to phone home on that one, huh?
Absolutely. That's just one example of high strangeness that I come across in my work, including even hypnosis. I've had some really strange things happen during hypnosis where in fact, once the tape recorder literally blew up. And it was a pretty clear one for me that, this one wasn't meant to be recorded. But other things have been come in on the tape that shouldn't be there, for example, things like that. So obviously, when you're working in this field and you're working with those kinds of energies, lots of high strangeness can happen. And I'm quite used to that now. It's sort of part of the deal.
All right. You can't just throw that little nugget out there and walk away, Mary. It's we have to re-examine that. When you say that you play back the recording and you've picked up things that shouldn't have been there, can you give us a few ideas of what kind of phenomenon you caught?
One of them was one of the most fun ones. I don't know if any of those with the mobile phones have got that funny UFO kind of sound when it goes off. There's a particular one that plays that sounds, it's a UFO song, and it's, do this kind of thing, a bit like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I was working with a lady, and I'd taken her to the place where she was about to go into the spacecraft itself in the regression. And as she's about to do that, out of the blue comes this funny sound, identical to what you would hear on a mobile phone with that kind of doo-dah kind of sound. Right. It lasted probably a minute or two maximum. And I didn't know where it came from. And we had no idea. And I thought maybe it might have been her phone, and maybe she'd got that one on her phone. When she came out of it, she said, "Did you hear that sound?" And I said, "If you mean the strange UFO sound, this doo-dah thing." She said, "Yes," she said. "Was that your phone?" I said, "No." I said, "There's no phones in the room." I said, "Is your phone in the room?" She said, "No." Everything was off. We still have no idea where that sound came from. And it literally came in just as she was about to walk in her regression onto the craft. And we still laugh about it. I've actually got the recording of it. Because obviously the whole recording was, I'd recorded it anyway digitally. Right. But that few seconds of that sound is literally still, it was on it as well. So whoever was playing games with us certainly wasn't the normal way. We really have no idea how it came into it just at that pivotal moment.
Mary, I'm curious. One of the things I find most frustrating after doing this radio show for 12 years and speaking to experiencers is the type of encounters, and again, in most of the cases, I believe the story that's coming out of their mouth, but we will hear regarding a race of aliens two completely different sides of the story. We will hear from one UFO expert and alien expert who is a clinical therapist and hypnotist, and that they have found this information, and that the grays are kind of the underlings, the dark belly of the alien world. They're the ones that are doing the scientific research and experimentation on us, and they are the dark force. The other aliens are not. And then we'll hear on the other side, no, the grays are the ones that are friends, and it's the mantis heads that are the most dangerous. And then we hear the Nordiques and so on and so forth. And I think that's what screws with the credibility of the belief in this and the stories. How can there be such, and I've got to guess, Mary, after 3,000 plus interviews and clients that you've dealt with, you have to hear conflicting stories and accounts of the type of interaction that they have with similar aliens, correct?
Absolutely. And it is one of the most, you're quite right, one of the most confusing sides to this, where you'll get some people that have very loving experiences with different types of grey beings, for example, and then you will get the same with the mantid beings, the insectoid-like ones, reptilians. Some have had really loving experiences. Other ones had terrifying experiences. And it's really hard to know what to make of that. I will add that I was told by one lady that she knew of 165 species of grey, which means very much like, there could be the ones that people are interacting with could be a multitude of different types of zeta or grey, for example, anyway. So some with their own agendas perhaps as well. But it is very confusing one of the things that has been useful in trying to ascertain what's really going on is some of the surveys we're doing with a new organization called FREE, which is the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences. And we've surveyed in the first and second survey, which has got 600 questions, 4,000 individuals. And what has come from that is quite stunning. And one of the things that people are going to find very difficult perhaps to understand is almost 80+% either were neutral or had positive experiences that were transformative with their encounters. Now that is against 10 to 15% that had negative experiences with the beings. One of the problems is that when you're working with someone who's terrified of their experiences, that often the terror is not what's happened, it's what they think may have happened or the unknown. So you've got to get past that to start with to see whether or not their interaction was actually awful and terrifying, or whether something very positive was going on after all. And one of the great ways to ascertain this for those that are ready to do it is to take them into a trance state and explore it and find out what really went on when they were in that space interacting with the ETs. And many of them certainly have procedures done, that, DNA taken and what have you. But we found with these surveys, 42% of people who'd had experiences with ETs had healing procedures done, which you won't remember or you don't know about, or you just find that suddenly you've had a strange experience and then you're well the next day and not have an understanding of what actually went on. So 42% of nearly 4,000 people found they'd had healing experiences. But if you don't know what that is, or you just remember being scared or coming out of it feeling scared, then your feeling is being scared rather than are you scared because of what the high strangeness, or are you scared because of what the beings may or may not have done. So sometimes the fear is because they don't understand what's happened or whatever as well. Having said all of that, what we have to take into account, and that will really suit the conspiracy guys, is that we do have an agenda on this planet which is very covert, which is called My Lab, and that's these military abductions. And that is without doubt emulating often the ET experience. And they are terrifying because they're drugged, they are treated, the information is taken from them. Not only are they drugged, they're traumatized. And the MyLab ones are the most traumatized of all. But this is not ET. This is actually human orchestrated abductions. And there's a lot of people coming out with those kinds of experiences as well. So we've got that in the equation.
And that to me is even more terrifying a concept and aspect of this story than the alien abduction.
It is, because it's human beings doing it to human beings. And there's a great deal of evidence to show this is going on. There are many people that have told me and found out they've had experiences with, military and also what are known as programmed life forms. These are genetically grown, if you like, clones of these ET beings, such as greys and also reptilians. And if you any of your listeners want to look into this, and it's very dark, is go to the bases interviews with Miles Johnson and the people that have seen these programmed life forms that are created by our own people, by, humans, to emulate the ET interaction. So you've got this complexity of data trying to work out, what is going on. I say to people that have had experiences, don't go on what you've read, go on what you feel from the beings yourself, because that's probably the most accurate for you to understand whether they're loving or whether they're self-serving or whether they've got other agendas. That is the only way you can, work with it yourself, because there is so much out there. There is a lot of, dodgy whistleblower material, because if you're a whistleblower, it has to be, you have to be wary simply because they're a whistleblower and you don't know how much of that they are speaking with integrity or not, because the mere fact you're a whistleblower, creates a certain anxiety around the information. So with all of that, it makes it very confusing for people to work out. All I say to people is, what is the outcome for you? And for many people, ultimately, when they come to terms with it, it seems for many of them they would not change it. And we're talking 60 to 80% of people that we've surveyed, and this is almost 4,000 individuals, have had positive psychologically, spiritual, transformative experiences that have changed their life in positive ways. That is a very significant way of perhaps looking out what is going on, because, you wouldn't have that as an example, as an outcome, if they were all evil aliens out to get you. I mean, it's just illogical.
I agree. Hey, listen, kids, I can't help you get across the galaxy or around the universe, but I can help you get around your own neighborhoods, towns, cities, and states, and you could do that through TrueCar. You may not be able to go into hyperdrive, but I can help you definitely find the new or previously owned vehicle of your dreams, and it's real easy. Use the TrueCar site, TrueCar.com. They are the site everybody's turning to right now. It's how I'm looking for a car for my son. It's how Tim just procured his brand new vehicle. And if you're in the market, they have got over 3 million cars currently sold, over 13,000 certified TrueCar dealers across the nation, and over 700,000 pre-owned vehicles currently available. And check this out. If that's not enough to excite you, they've got an average savings of over $3,000 off the manufacturer's suggested retail price. When you work with TrueCar, you know everything about that car before you even hit the lot. You know that it's on site. You know that the price is right. You know what other people are paying for that exact same car before you even get there. So you know you've got the best value. You can have the confidence going in to buy, and you no longer have to sweat the small stuff. Go in and make it the most effortless buying experience of your life. So trust me on this. When you're ready to buy new or used, visit TrueCar to enjoy a more confident car buying experience. Some features are not available in all states. Mary, one of the things that I found fascinating doing the show as well is talking to some of the most well-spoken, highly educated guests that have had experiences like this. And one of the people that has come to the foreground over the years is Whitley Strieber. But I found that it's been confounding even with him through the years of doing interviews of how his take on what has happened to him can swing depending on the day and his attitude. I know on our first visit with him, at one point he got very riled up, and I said, "Did you feel that you were in danger?" And he said, "Of course I was. I was raped. And he was very upset by this. And just one of our last visits about a year ago, he was much more calm, and he just called them the visitors and the friends, and I've never had a bad experience. And when I try to bring up the past of bad things, it's almost like that didn't exist. That, I wonder, does there turn into some kind of psychosis for people that maybe are too exposed to the aliens? Or do you believe that he had a breakthrough, much like you were speaking about? His first versions of these connections were terrifying because they were new and they were out of the ordinary, and as he got used to them and used to what was going on, it became routine, and he realized that it was not as terrifying as he had once thought.
I think you certainly hit the nail on the head there. What I've discovered is, as people explore their experiences without the fear, they start to see a different picture. They start to understand a lot more that's going on. When I wrote Awakening, it's a book that leads you through the process of, is it real? If it's real, what do I do about it? What do I do about the fear? How do I understand it? And what I've discovered is, as I've worked with people, is the more they understand about their experiences, the more they change their attitude to what they've experienced or not. And to give you one example of that, I worked with a gentleman that was very comfortable with his experiences, except for one thing. And he said, when they bring their big black eyes towards my face, I am terrified. I don't know what they're doing, but I am terrified. And I said to him, so what do you think happens? And he said, well, I think they're probably just going to take me over. So I said, and he said, look, I want to deal with the fear. I want to understand what really happened. I was a very courageous gentleman to do that. And I said, okay, so let's find out. And I took him into a trance state, and he starts to tell me about the big eye coming towards him. And his body is literally shaking with fear as this eye is coming towards him in this trance state. And it's coming closer and closer. And I'm saying, well, what's happening? He says, I don't know. And then I said to him, tell me when it gets close enough that you feel something's happening. He said, it's happening now. And then his whole body relaxed. And I said, so what's going on? What are they doing? Oh, he said, All they're doing is giving me information. So I said to him, so you're okay with that? He said, oh yeah, I'm fine. And from that moment, he had no more fear of his experience with them. He realized what was actually going on. So often, because we don't know, or because we're fearful of the unknown, we're inclined to build up this huge fear in our mind and not really fully understand. And a lot of it is when they don't fully understand. You take somebody into their experience, they see themselves on the table and they see procedures being done with 3 or 4 beings or whatever. They may be greys, they may be mantid, they may be humanoid or whatever. And you look at that scene, it's a terrifying scene. But if you then get that individual to access why they're there, all of a sudden everything changes often as not, and they find out, oh, this is a healing procedure. They're taking this because they're doing this. They're giving me information. As one gentleman explained, that the being came and put their hands on his forehead. And I said, so what are they doing? He says, oh, they're downloading information. So from going from terrified to actually quite accepting, it's like when they know what's going on, everything changes. And I suspect with Whitley, it's the same kind of thing. The more you understand, the less fearful you are. And this is where, hypnosis can be really valuable, because even though you may be terrified initially in exploring something, often as not, it can turn the way that you look at it 180 degrees. And I've come across this hundreds of times, not just now and again, hundreds of times. It has changed the way they viewed their experience in a completely new way and in a transformative way for many people.
I'm curious in the way you handle your clients. I have a gentleman that I'm acquainted with in New York who's a therapist, and he began getting these kind of comments and experiences shared with him. And as we were just kind of talking off base, he doesn't want to go on air. He doesn't want to, kind of promote what he does in these cases. But as we talked about the different aspects of this, he said there are some of these aliens, when they begin telling me about them, and it's always one form of alien group that they're doing, I kind of end our therapy sessions and refuse to work with them going forward. He goes, it's the same I've had with working with people that are in organized crime. He goes, if I realize what part of the family they're attached to, I try to end that therapy and my work with them, because I don't want to draw the attention or ire of the family. And in some cases, he believes there are a few of these alien interlopers that have very nefarious thoughts and plans going into action. Do you ever find yourself hearing the stories and fearing that maybe working this through and peeling back the memories, it could expose you to some form of danger?
Well, that's an interesting one, and on 2 levels. One of them is that, yes, maybe, I'm drawing the attention of different types of beings, and I mean, there's a whole range of them. We're not just talking about reptilians and zetas, for example. We're talking about feline beings, lion, cat beings, crystalline beings, energy beings, plasma beings. I mean, I could give you a whole list of different ones and whatever. I have never felt threatened in any way. If anything, it's almost like there is a cooperation going on for me, working with the individual in some way to help them understand. And I feel that I'm coming from a place of assisting someone to understand what's going on. And that never seems to have been a problem. The only time, there's been a couple of times where they've not been allowed to remember stuff because it's not time. They've been told it's a timing thing, and it's important that they can only know so much for a certain time. And I've never pushed that. I always trust that the psyche of the individual guides the process. It's not for me. All I do is help them to ask the questions that they need to answer. So I have never felt threatened by any of the beings as such in any way. But I will say it's a different one with what I think is the military covert side. And there's no doubt, I often wonder if my phone is tapped and they're keeping an eye on me and making sure that I'm not going to be a pain in the neck on some level or another. Because there's no doubt that anyone gets involved in this and you are monitored. I think that goes par for course, that they know what you're up to and whatever. But I assume for the moment I'm not a threat because I'm not out to expose anything as such. My only mandate is to help people understand what's going on for them so that they can get on with their lives in the most balanced and integrated way. So that's, the information I put out, I know, is enormously helpful. It validates people's experiences. It helps them to feel more normal. And that is really important to me because so many are misunderstood and are medicated or sent to psychiatric units because in the main, psychology is not owning the fact that that anything out of the box can be tangible and it can be real. And everyone who has these experiences has multidimensional experiences, not just the physical marks on the body. They are experiencing precognitive dreams, dreams of the future. They often see energy fields. They'll often see spirits. They'll often see, and they'll even be called outside to see craft. I know many experiences that say, I know when to go out and take a picture because they're there. So that, there's a telepathic download. All of these things take you out of the box, but also if you've got a more a traditional way of looking at psychology and what in reality, they would be seen as aberrations. And, the next thing you know, you're stuck full of Prozac.
Why, if all of these people are being approached by these alien races and they're downloading information and uploading information, what has been the basis, or not basis, but what has been the most, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble trying to formulate this question, but I guess, what type of messages are they receiving? What is the information they're downloading? If the aliens or interdimensional beings or energetic forms, whatever you want to refer to them, are going to all of this trouble, you would think it would be for a greater purpose instead of just an abduction here and there. And, it would be something on a more global scale that would make a difference. What is the information that's being given to these people?
It's a good question, Dave. And the reason I wrote The New Human, which is the book I wrote that's out there 6 months ago, is about what I call we are being upgraded as a species. And in it, there are at least 9 chapters on the children and what the children are telling me, and that this is not hypnosis, this is conscious recall, that children under 10, many of them, are talking about going up on the spacecraft, being taught by various types of beings, being shown advanced physics, being taken to other planets. They're shown how to use their psychic abilities. Like one 8-year-old young lady told me that she was shown how to use her third eye and how to levitate and how to use her abilities. A lot of these children are aware that they can, if you like, not only can some of them be telepathic, but a lot of them are also having awareness way beyond their age. They'll talk about a whole range of things that they can do and what they've come here to do. And their interaction with these beings is that what they're being told is you've got to take care of the planet. You've got to stop polluting it. You've got to understand that the behaviors on this planet now are going to end up destroying it. So a lot of the messages are ecological. They're also spiritual. So the children are very aware and they have these abilities. And I've talked about, some of the things that I've written about, some of the things that they talk about, not only because they feel very close to these beings. For example, an 8-year-old told me that he has interactions with the mantid beings who are family. He says they're part of my family. And when I die, I'm going to go and I'm going to become a mantid being again. And this is coming from an 8-year-old telling me this, that his ancestors are mantid. So a lot of these children relate very much to these visitors or these star beings and say that before they came here, they were one of them. And they will talk about their origins as being Orion, Pleiades, Arcturus, a lot of these different star systems. One 10-year-old in England told me he came through a portal in the sun. Now, people can read this and it can read like science fiction. But I have to say that some of the concepts that these children are mentioning under 10 are information that most kids don't even know about. One young lady telling me that she'd been shown a black hole and a wormhole and what it was like by the beings on the craft. In other words, they seem to be educated into a lot more of the understanding of the truth and the nature of reality, higher physics, understanding the origin of the species. And many of them are aware that they've come here with that kind of mission or mandate. Now, this is children we're talking about, right. Children that are reading books on this. They don't watch talk shows And it absolutely astounds the parents. The parents are listening to this and saying, how do you know this?
Let's get into that a little bit more. We have to take a break. We're up against it. And then, speaking of these star children and these different breeds of human that are coming about, there's a phenomena that we've been speaking about on the show for the last 5 years, and I'll bring it up to you when we come back and see if there's any information or correlation between these new humans and the black-eyed kids. We'll do that when we return. You're listening to the best in paranormal talk radio. Now we're digging deep into the darchives because it's time for a new edition of Theater of the Mind. Someone's knocking at your door. The real-life E.T. encounter of Pete Dubchek. I, like most people, have been fascinated by the idea of interplanetary travelers visiting us. I hear many of the accounts and think they're all so fascinating, but I'm never quite sure how sincere the experiencer really is. Some of the accounts that people have shared sound so fantastic and unbelievable, and that in itself makes me think maybe there's something to this. Now, because of this thought, I spend a lot of time with my eyes cast to the skies in hopes of seeing something extraordinary. That leads me to my story. As ridiculous as it seems, this happened to me and my cousin a few years ago, and to this day, I'm left questioning everything I know and have believed to be true. We had spent the day at a softball tourney in the blistering sun, 3 full games of championship series softball, which I'm proud to say we won. We had a few libations to celebrate, and we set out for home. We were both fine to drive, and although quite tired, we knew we would be fine on the short trip home. My cousin Kenneth and I were laughing over the antics of the day, windows rolled down and some classic rock quietly playing in the background as we discussed missed chances and moments of greatness from our day of athletic exhibition. As we drove down the quiet, desolate country road, we noticed a strange orange glow coming from ahead and off into the woods. We figured some kids had probably started a bonfire or something, and we just kept chatting, but our eyes kept returning to that eerie glow. We finally got to the part in the woods that the light was emanating from, and we still couldn't figure out what was causing the light. There was no telltale smoke or burning smell, but the woods seemed alive with light. I rolled to a small stop, and we stared through the window toward the source. Hey, maybe we should call fire and rescue so this doesn't turn into a wildfire that gets out of hand. That's what I suggested to Ken. He just nodded. I pulled out my phone and with my dirty fingers started hammering out 911 on the keypad. But nothing happened. There was no signal, no connection, and no bars on my phone. I thought, even if you're out of range, you could always have 911. Isn't that the way this is supposed to work? I just looked at my bewildered cousin. He took out his phone and mashed the numbers himself and hit send. Again, there was nothing. Well, I'm going to go take a look. That's what I informed him, and I popped open my car door. He followed in suit. I left the car idling, and we set off on foot toward the light. We hadn't gotten too far into the woods when we saw this bright orange thing just hovering there. It was like the size of a train car and kind of a funny oblong shape. As we got closer, the light began to dim, and without warning, it went out completely. Then it fell the few feet it had been hovering and slammed to the ground with a heavy, muted thud. To say I was confused might be a bit of an understatement. I signaled to my cousin and moved toward the object. When I got right in front of it, I noticed there was no heat coming from it, which I found strange, seeing as it was just glowing a moment ago and spitting off enough light to brighten a pretty sizable part of this forest. I made eye contact with Kenneth and nodded to him, gesturing with my head and a tilt of my neck that he should reach out and touch it. He shot me a look back, like telling me there's no way in hell that's going to happen. So I took a deep breath, and I reached out my hand and placed it against the exterior. It was cool and smooth to the touch. I slid my hand over the front of it, looking for a seam, screw heads, or something to give me a clue as to what this was. After a bit more examining, we realized this was like nothing either one of us had ever seen. Then, we heard the clatter of something metallic coming from inside, almost like a drawer full of silverware had been dumped out, and we shot each other another strange look. I reached out my hand again and rapped hard against it. It sounded hollow. It was this thumping, hollow noise. Then I gave the old customary shave and a haircut knock, and we smiled and stifled a laugh. Then it banged back in response. Boom, boom. We let out with a nervous laugh and stared intently at the item. It began to make a mechanical grinding sound like someone trying to shove a car from gear to gear with no clue how to drive a stick. It spun quick, and the corner caught me off guard, sending me to my backside. My cousin reached out and banged again. The same set of knocks repeated from inside, and we laughed. Then it roared to life and began glowing. It sounded like a jet engine on full blast, but there was no wind disturbance. At this point, we knowingly nodded to one another and took off running back to the car, sticks and twigs snapping under our speedy gait. "What the hell was that?" I called out. "Beats me, but I'm not staying around to find out," he yelled back breathlessly. We could see the road ahead, and our car was still idling, waiting and offering its protection. We burst into nervous laughter as we got closer, knowing safety and a quick escape were now very close. Then it happened. A loud blast of air sent a shockwave sensation that hit us from behind, sending us both tumbling forward. Then came the flash of light. The next memory I have was standing in my living room with Kenneth, both fully aware and awake, with no clue how we got there. We weren't tired feeling or groggy. We were just standing there like we had appeared in the living room. We stared at each other for a long moment, speechless and completely dumbfounded. That's when our attention was turned to the banging from the front door. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom. The shave and a haircut knock? Seriously? Only this knock made the house shake. Ken shuffled back a step and said, "Hey man, someone's knocking at your door." We fixed our gaze on the door, and that's when we saw them. Two little gray beings, wide-eyed and staring in through the window. Part of me wanted to scream. The other part just wanted to fill my pants. We slowly walked toward the closed and locked door, keeping the beings in view the whole time as they stood there, as transfixed by us as we were of them. Finally, we were face to face with them, just staring. Then, like two giddy school children, they turned around and almost skipped and ran from the door. And we heard what sounded like incredibly high-pitched, silly giggles come from the visitors as they bounded down the driveway. Then it hit again, a huge white flash of light, and they were gone. Kenneth asked where my car was and how we got home. I had no idea. We went to the garage, jumped in my second car, and took off down the road, where we found my other car, still sitting, idling quietly, and waiting for us to take her home. We've spoken about this through the years, and we still get a chuckle out of it. On that one night, on that one road, we ended up participating in a very strange version of Ding Dong Ditch with some aliens. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Here at Podcast One, we love hearing from you. We read every tweet and comment you send our way, so don't miss your chance to take our summer listener survey. Just go to podcastone.com and click on the survey banner, or go to podcastone.com/mysurvey. It only takes a few minutes, and it gives you the opportunity to make a direct impact on your favorite shows. Tell us how you really feel, so we can get to know you better. We value your thoughts and participation, so check out the survey at podcastone.com/mysurvey, or click on the survey banner on podcastone.com.
Mitch LaFon here. Please check out my new podcast, Rock Talk with Mitch LaFon, every Monday on the Jericho Network here at Podcast One. I'll be talking to all the biggest names in rock, including Andy Summers from The Police, Poison, Night Ranger, Loverboy, and a lot more. Download new episodes each Monday via podcastone.com, the Podcast One app, or simply subscribe via iTunes.
Beyond the darkness,
Welcome back to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness as we wrap up another week with our special series on keeping your eyes to the skies. And remember, all of the guests you've heard this week, we've got links up to their books, and you can find them, and you can support our advertisers who help support us. Just go to darknessradio.com, click on the Killer Links tab, and you'll find all of the books and the documentaries and so much more in our special Amazon storefront. It's all right there for you, so you can find it easier than ever before. Again, go to darknessradio.com and click on the Killer Deals link. And for all the other advertisers you hear on our show, just go to podcast1.com, click on the Killer Deals link, and then scroll down to the Beyond the Darkness banner. You'll find all of the advertisers and all of the special deals that we have in play so that you can take advantage of them. And please remember, you're going to make these purchases. Please use our advertisers and the special links that we provide on the show, because with those ads and the advertisers, we're able to keep the show free for you and keep it down to a minimum in the commercials that we're able to play throughout the show. So please, again, support the advertisers that support our show. We appreciate the work that you guys do, and you can find it again at podcast1.com. Killer Deals, and then scroll down to Beyond the Darkness to support those advertisers. Our guest this evening, Mary Rodwell, and her new book is called The New Human, which describes and documents star children. Now, Mary, are you familiar with the stories of the black-eyed children at all?
Yes, I am. I think they showed themselves up in the UK in Suffolk, from what I remember.
There's been different stories spread around, and at first we thought it was becoming kind of a viral urban legend. But now I'm starting to hear stories from literally around the world and from many people and sources that I find very credible, from military personnel to doctors, nurses, law enforcement, moms, dads. Every walk of life seems to be prone to having these experiences, these children that sometimes appear in groups of 2 or 3, their eyes, the entire sclera, jet black, inky black, and they talk in very kind of hushed tones, trying to get into your home or get you to follow them to go somewhere. And this all sounds very alien in nature. Do you believe that there is any chance that these might be some of the hybridization children that are going on between our planet and some of these other realms?
It's really hard to know, because I haven't got enough information other than the fact that they do turn up. They don't seem to, people seem to be quite frightened of them, and they don't seem to be something that they feel is very positive.
Right.
But it may not be, in fact, alien. It may actually be another of the MyLab side of things as well, because they are also producing hybrids. I always know when I say this how really strange it sounds. But some of the technology that the ETs are doing with their creation of hybrids, also the military are doing the same. And I actually worked with a lady who believed she was a hybrid in the UK. And she said she was part human, part reptilian. And she was aware that 2 of her children were hybrids created by the military, not by extraterrestrial at all, but by the military. So I think we have to be very careful about making assumptions, because we really don't know one way or another. But everything is a possibility, of course.
Now, we've been hearing the term rainbow children, indigo children, crystalline children, star children for the last 10 to 12 years. Seems to be a buzzword. Do you believe that this is the new wave, the new form of human? And if it is, shouldn't there be something that we can earmark in their DNA or physicality to prove that there has been some kind of change taking place?
I actually, in my presentations, I go into the DNA because it's, as an ex-nurse midwife, it's very interesting to me to look at the physical possibilities of these changes. And certainly there does seem to be evidence. One of them is an extra strand of DNA with a young child in England called Alfie Clamp, and they found this extra DNA strand with him. There's also in LA, they were looking at a young boy who had been born with AIDS from his mother, and had had a number of years where he had AIDS. Then all of a sudden, he no longer had AIDS. And they found that 24 of his codons were switched on against the 20 that most of us only have switched on. And they were saying 1% of the children these days has this, and it makes them almost immune to everything. Now, these are just little bits of what Dr. William Brown talks about, a molecular biologist who really believes that there is a new evolved type of human being born. And he reckons that this genetic modification is occurring right now in utero and is producing a new human. And he said this is shown by the exponential increase in autistic, ADD and indigo children. And he said the new genetic architecture allows them to see the world in a multidimensional fashion. He goes into a lot more of the information, which is in my book, about the DNA changes. There's another molecular biologist who also says the same thing. She calls them letter people. And she said that, again, the dyslexics, the ADHDs, the autistic, they are, in fact, wired differently. And the reason that she believes they're wired differently is to stop them being reprogrammed into an archaic, limited 3D reality. It actually makes it harder for them to be programmed into that. And that the reason behind that is that it allows them to use more of their multidimensional abilities without being shut down. And that makes a great deal of sense to me if we are evolving as a species.
Right, and let's face it, we are. We've made quite a few evolutions and revolutions throughout our humanity. Does that necessarily mean that there's alien intervention with this going on? Couldn't it just be that the bodies are starting to figure out how to fend off and protect themselves from deadly viruses like HIV?
Oh, I think there's no doubt that that's part of it. But I also know that many of those that have had these upgrades, certainly there's been tweaking done because they're aware. In fact, some of the parents have said, or the mothers have said, that they've been told this by the beings themselves, that there's been an extra addition or a kind of tweaking done, and that their child would be very different or very special. And they, and the children are.
Right. Now let's look at it from the side of therapy as well, please. And understand, I'm not trying to be combative at all, but I know, we're going to have a large listener base that's going to have these questions, so I have to be the vocalization of them. Couldn't it also be, though, that, genetic changes and hiccups happen in the system, and maybe it's easier for a mother or father that has a child that has special needs to think that it's an upgrade and that it's some form of new human that's beginning to process and be born, because that's easier to accept than I have a child with physical or mental disabilities, which a lot of parents end up taking a lot of guilt over because they feel they are possibly responsible for these issues with their children.
I think it's very valid, and I think it's very important too to understand that the only reason, or the main reason, that I've come to this conclusion is because I've been speaking to experts in various fields. One of the things that has been discovered about autistic children, and there's a Dr. Diane Powell that's been doing testing with a particular some of the autistic children, and saying that she believes now that they are telepathic, for example. So this is just one of the qualities. I've also talked to experts on autism, and they are saying that they feel very strongly with working with them that they have more awareness, more abilities, more sensitivity than the average human, for example. The ADHD is an interesting one. One of the gentlemen that is a UFO researcher, Neil Gold in Hong Kong, told me in his 50s he found out he was ADHD. He wrote a book called Close Encounters of the ADHD Kind, explaining how he always saw reality differently in an expanded way. And he said, I never really fully understand how I saw more than the average human. And he actually redefined ADHD as always dialed into higher dimensions. That's just another, tidbit, if you like, from my presentations. But I have gone into this in great depth, talked to educators that have worked with some of these children, and they are aware that the sensitivities, like for touch, for even a broader visual sensitivity, so they see more of the visual spectrum, more sensitivity in their in touch, for example. Dr. Lena Olson has been looking at this from her own perspective as a molecular biologist, and she said almost they have synesthesia, which means, to those that don't know what this is, it's like you'll see a color, but you will also feel a color, for example, or you'll get even a frequency of that color. So you're getting a multidimensional package of something. And that is why a lot of the children struggle in the mundane 3D type schools, because they are getting an overload of sensory information, which makes them struggle a great deal with traditional schooling.
But can't we follow the line that we've also become a world of genetically modified organisms, food, drink? We're constantly dabbling in our water systems. They're tainted with Fukushima disaster, nuclear radiation. We've got food. They're finding in baby formula, they're finding some of the components from rocket fuel. All of these genetically modified things and processed foods that we're putting into our body, that's got to be making some kind of change as well that would affect different senses, different abilities, different, aspects of who we are as humans. And again, this would fall into the realm of just not natural, but unfortunately nature of where we're living because of the world that we live in, as opposed to alien, intervention in our world.
Dave, I think you're absolutely right. There's no doubt. But I see a darker agenda with that. I believe that things like, the chemtrails, the fluoride, which is a neurotoxin, for example, in our water and in our toothpaste, for example, the genetically GMO foods and all that, I believe that is an agenda to shut these new ones down, because there are those out there that don't want to see us changing and evolving. And I may be completely wrong, but unfortunately I've come to look at humanity and some of those that are in charge of us on multiple levels as having another agenda that doesn't want to see us evolving into the way that we should be. And all these kinds of things are making us ill. You know that, I know that.
Right.
If you look at it, and I know that sounds very extreme, and I may be way off here, but if you know that there's things happening and there are different intelligences trying to upgrade humans, where you've got children that can look at you and know when you're lying, wouldn't you, if you are still invested in the old 3D system, wouldn't you want to say, well, that's not going to be good for us, so let's see what we can do to compromise that? And I think a lot of these things are about compromising this evolutionary shift, which I believe is actually going on. And all these are mechanisms to shut the kids down. Giving children of 4, 5, and 6 Ritalin, to me is an abuse. And it's man's inhumanity to man. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's how I feel. And we know that fluoride's a neurotoxin. I mean, and yet there are dentists still painting people's teeth with it and saying it's good for you because they're uninformed and what have you. I'm not saying that the ones on the ground are aware that they know they're doing this. They honestly believe it's for your own good. But there are, the ones that are behind this, and I won't get into all the drug companies and what I think most governments, right, because I think you already have probably got a pretty good idea of what I'm going to say. But this isn't about serving humanity. This is about self-serving individuals on our planet that do not want to see this shift in evolution, because it will take away the power and completely change our society, and that is not what they want.
All right, walk me through, if you don't mind. I mean, a lot of what we're discussing is theoretical and hypothetical and in your belief, probable. But to give us back to some of the basics, if you could talk to us about a few of the cases and families or individuals you've spoken to, that, again, everything they say might sound like it flies in the face of logic, but your son went to go meet one of these experiencers, and when he walked away, his confidence in his skepticism was definitely rocked. And that's because there was a difference to that type of story. Could you share with us a couple of the stories that have been the most impactful to you, that we are definitely dealing with an alien race and that we are in contact with them?
Oh, look, I think that there are so many, and that's why I wrote the book, The New Human, because there are so many amazing stories. One of them recently that I think is very, to me, is quite profound, is where a medical doctor actually had this kind of shift in her consciousness through her interaction with these beings, and she now works multidimensionally, if you like, activating, she believes, DNA. And Dr. Marie Batchelor, she's one minute she's a 3D medical doctor, and the next minute she calls herself, a multidimensional doctor. She's, for me, that is a pretty profound shift. But the story that you're mentioning that I think was profound for my son was a gentleman, Peter Curry in Sydney, who had an experience with a being that was apparently trying to get him sexually excited. And he woke up in the middle of it and realized what was going on. So he was seeing it consciously, this very beautiful being that was naked on top of him. I mean, maybe many men's fantasy. But what happened was he was left with these 3 hairs, these strange hairs that were not belonging to him, on his genitals. And they were later looked at by a geneticist and had enormous number of different anomalies in them that couldn't be explained. It's called The Hair of the Alien and was written by researcher Bill Chalker. So anyone who wants to look at something very tangible, I think that's an extremely tangible story, and certainly one that will give you pause for thought, if nothing else.
Yeah, that definitely spoke to me as one of the more bizarre stories and cases in this realm, because again, when they start doing the DNA and genetic testing on the remnants that were left behind, and there's too many anomalies and answers that can't be given, that certainly leaves you in the situation of we need to start examining this more. This is so widespread, and so many certified therapists are hearing these stories. Why is the world not taking more of a notice of this, Mary?
Well, I've met and talked with, and on the quiet, many clinical psychologists that I know that are experiencers. And their biggest problem is that they're in a profession that at the moment still doesn't acknowledge this as a reality. And including, I can mention a couple of psychiatrists that I've known that also can't, even though they've had experiences. The problem is this whole, I call it the reality dysfunction. It's a problem that, the average person and professional is uninformed of this truth, this reality, that people are experiencing this. And we really do need now a true disclosure, so that these millions of people who are having these experiences can know they're not crazy and can start talking about it. We're getting it to a certain extent where, I've in my book, there's a medical doctor, there's a minister of religion that talks about his ET experiences and past lives. That they're slowly coming out, professionals. Dr. Olson's an experiencer that talks about her experiences. She's a molecular biologist. The fact is that until finally we get some acknowledgement that this is a reality, it still means that you're considered crazy, on the fringe. Nobody's going to believe it, because a lot of this, Dave, and as well as I do, you've heard the stories. It's so bizarre. It's so out of our framework. It sounds like science fiction. And for many people, because they're uninformed, understandably think there's something wrong with the individual. They're seeking attention. When what they don't realize is that most of these people, the last thing they want is attention. They just want answers, and they just want to be able to own their truth, but they can't because they know how they'll be perceived.
There doesn't seem to be a change. There hasn't been a change since 1947 with Kenneth Arnold or the Roswell experience. There's no more acceptance today than there was before in the governmental approach to these situations. Everybody's calling for some kind of disclosure. Do you really believe, Mary, that we're on any precipice for that to actually occur?
I certainly think something is in the wind. And when I say that is I've heard numerous individuals that have experiences saying they believe there's going to be something happen that's going to shift consciousness and awareness on with the public. What that is, your guess is as good as mine. Whether or not it means that they're all going to show up sometime, or whether there's going to be a lot more of the physical sightings where people, have these experiences, I don't know. But there does seem to be this sense that if the governments don't do it, that something else will happen, because that's what they're getting. The people that are having contact and having encounters, that there is something ahead that will blow this open. And I can't think of it coming soon enough.
Do you believe that there is a generational curse, if you will, to some of these abduction and alien encounter scenarios?
There's no doubt that the families that I've talked to, that they can trace it back through the bloodlines, right back to grandparents and even great-grandparents. Well, they'll say, you know, my great-granddad was really interested in UFOs, or my grandmother was always a bit psychic, or whatever. You can see the way it's fed through the genetic lines to the grandchildren. So there's no doubt in my mind it's intergenerational, that families with this seem to carry it on. Excuse me.
Why some families and not others? Why parts of a family and not the other side of the family?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure. Some of it may be to the acceptance and awareness of each individual. I know people that have had experiences but are too terrified to look into it. And I think that if they shut down, then it's not obvious. There have been siblings where one of them said, I know my brother was involved with this, but he never wants to talk about it. He never wants to explore it. He's too scared. So I think there are lots of people with experiences that are just too terrified to own it or to accept it might be part of their experiences through their lives. They're just too scared, and they don't want to be seen as crazy, or, it's just too hard.
Doesn't that seem strange to you that these aliens want to help? That they're making this kind of connection to better us, yet they leave people in such a state that they're embarrassed and ashamed. They're frightened to come forward. They're frightened to talk. They're mocked. They're ridiculed. It seems to fly in the face of the logic of them being here to help to begin with.
Well, this is where you get to the spiritual side of this, and it depends on your perspective. I agree with you. Coming from that kind of level of awareness, it seems very cruel. It seems very heartless. And it seems like, you know, that nothing makes sense, and why should it? The only time that this starts to make sense to people is when they see it as more of a spiritual journey, a journey of slowly experiencing and waking up and looking at a bigger picture. And we do this as a therapist all the time, you know, when somebody's had an abusive childhood, for example, or they've, you know, had a bad relationship or whatever. What we're trying to do is to get people to look at this in a way that they can live with in a more aware, integrated way. And for many, they do that through looking at it as a journey, a spiritual journey of learning more about themselves and their strengths and their weaknesses and what they need to grow with. What I'm told by those that have these experiences, ultimately, this seems to be the way they perceive it, because many of them see that they have come from those species and have come in human form to experience being human, but also to expose what's going on. I mean, Niara Isley, an experiencer in the US, has written the book Facing the Shadow, Embracing the Light, and she has had experiences and had hypnosis where she's discovered that she comes from these beings, and that she had a mandate to expose my lab. So she'd experienced it so she could expose it. So sometimes they see this as part of the mission, part of the job they've come here to do, to help wake people up, to help people understand what's going on. And many of them talk about going back and talking to the beings in different councils and explaining what's going on this planet. So in other words, some of them are us. And they're showing what's happening on this planet from a very experiential point of view, so that this shift can happen. Because let's face it, at the moment, we've got some really strange individuals owning, in charge of governments that seem to be quite happy with looking at nuclear power and nuclear bombs as a way of dealing with issues, and no doubt taking everyone else with them. We really need an upgrade, Dave. We really do. Oh,
I agree with you on that. It is a scary time to be alive. I want to know, too, what your thoughts would be. All right, if there is all of this change going on around us, these people are dealing with these beings, some just don't want to be involved in it anymore. Are you hearing from people that are finding a way to break free from their interactions from these aliens? And what do you also make of the alien interactions which respond to the evocation of the name of Jesus Christ? We've heard quite a few stories where people will call on the name of Jesus and these aliens recoil and will leave. That sounds like a totally different scenario, but yet it's affecting these, what people refer to as alien beings.
The complexity is the problem here. I'm now going to take people to another level of the way I've looked at this. We've not just got biological ET beings, we've got interdimensionals, extradimensionals, transdimensionals, and possibly visitors from our future. We've got entities, lower entity forms that may be seen as ET but are not. They're just lower astral forms that feed off fear and can, and what people say, can possess people and make people feel so depressed they do dangerous things. That is not extraterrestrial. But the trouble is, because people are so uninformed, they put everything in the same box. First of all, though, those that have had extraterrestrial experiences have said at times, I don't want any more for the moment, and they've been left alone, so that they have been listened to. The ones that respond to Jesus or the frequency of that,
right,
that loving energy, for example, I don't know for sure, but I believe that these are the lower entities. These are the ones we would call the jinn, or lower entities. There's a whole range of them, like the jinn and whatever. And these are ones that are around people who are very depressed, people that are on addicts, for example, that are in a bad space. Anyone who's in a very low vibrational state, they will attach themselves to. These are not extraterrestrial. These are actually lower entities. They're like parasites, if you like, and they can influence as well. I believe the ones that go away when somebody says that are not extraterrestrial at all, but these lower entities, or these less loving ones, or self-serving ones, or these parasitic ones. The trouble is, I don't know enough to be an expert on this. All I can say is, this is what I've come to understand, is we're not just dealing with extraterrestrials, we're dealing with spirits, we're dealing with a whole range from, what you'd call elementals to all these other entities or intelligences, because they're not all extraterrestrial. They, as I say, some of them are interdimensional, extradimensional, transdimensional, and even visitors from our future. So we've got to be able to understand who's what before we start putting blame on one or another or whatever. And there's so much we don't know. And it's almost like this multidimensional elephant. And we've all got little bits of it. One's got a hold of the tail, someone's got a bit of the ear, someone's got a bit of the trunk. And we think we know what we're dealing with, but we haven't a clue because we can't see the whole elephant. And at the moment, that's, I think, where we're all at.
What drives you and keeps you doing this? I've got to guess. You take your fair share of licks from people that are skeptical and questioning your authenticity, questioning your motivation. How do you keep going forward and doing this and not have this impact you negatively, Mary?
Well, there's a couple of things. One of them is my advanced age. I've come to the conclusion quite bluntly that what people think is none of my business. So they can think what they like. It doesn't change what I know and what I understand, just because they're potentially very uninformed. So why should it matter what they think? Because most people are uninformed. It's not their fault. It's because they've been lied to from the moment they were born. So why would I get angry with that? The bottom thing is you can't unknow what you've learned. And I'm somebody, that wants to find out as much as I can before I end up moving from this planet and going somewhere else. And I think most people would like to know the truth. So I'm speaking the truth. And if that means that I have to put up with people that don't understand that, that's the least of my worries, because at the end of the day, though, that matters to me is being truthful and being authentic. And this is me being myself. And quite honestly, it's a lot more fun than playing the game where most of the time you're putting on all these masks and nobody really knows who you are. At least people have a rough idea who I am, even if they think I'm crazy.
Are you ever dejected to the fact that all of these people, 3,000 plus interviews with people that have had these experiences, are you a little bummed that they haven't made themselves known to you personally yet? The aliens, that is.
I'm going to tell you absolutely. I keep saying, I'm your best PR agent here. Isn't it time you actually showed me a spacecraft? I want to physically touch it. I want to put my hand on it and I want to shake your hand and find out a little bit more about you. How about it, guys? So I'm hoping that, if I ask enough times, that at some point I will get my wish. Because you know what, even though it probably would be terrifying on one level, on another level, it would be absolutely fascinating. Just imagine being able to interact with intelligences that are traveling not only on our physical plane, but our interdimensional one, and finding out what that's all about. I think that would be the ultimate high, personally.
Have you ever heard of the Seri Ranch in Trout Lake, Washington? James Gilliland?
I spent a week there, Dave.
And
so
you did not have an experience there, Mary?
Look, I've seen lots of craft there.
Okay.
Absolutely. Let's put it like this, that I do feel and sense things, and I do believe that sometimes I have a kind of communication, let's put it like that, of whoever. And I do sense that some of that may be interdimensional, it may be extraterrestrial. I have a sense it may be, but I've got no recall of ever being on a spacecraft, although I will tell you this, a number of people have said they've seen me up there. So I just would like to remember now. That would be really nice.
Mary, thank you so much for your time this evening and sharing it with us here on Beyond the Darkness. It's been a pleasure. Your documentary was so charming and really enlightening as well. And the new book is out and available. It's called The New Human, and we will have a link up to that. If you go to darknessradio.com, click on the Killer Deals link, you'll see all of the books and product that we talk about on the show right there. Mary Rodwell, thank you so much.
David, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I look forward to meeting you someday and carrying on our conversation as well. That's it for this week, kids. Keep your eyes to the skies. You don't know what you might be missing. Have a great week. I'll be gone now to England, and I'll be returning back to the show sometime around the end of the first week in October. But I do have a whole slate of brand new episodes that I've already recorded for you for next week. So I'll be back, but I'll be out in England. Keep a safe prayer in your thoughts and hearts for me and my group as we are going throughout England in this kind of tumultuous time. And also prayer and good thoughts in your heart for Mary Rodwell as she travels.